Hi, folks. Welcome to another edition of Israel Explained. I haven't done one of these since the election, so there's a lot to catch up on. Of course, I didn't enjoy the results to the elections all that much, but I will be looking at what the elections mean for Israel, what this means for the region, not in this episode, but once I've gathered a little bit more of a clear picture of what all this means. In the meantime, I'll take a look at three things that I think are very important that are happening right now. Those are the Lebanese ceasefire, the outstanding draft notices for Haredi men, and what's happening right now in Gaza. So let's start with the ceasefire. Before Trump was elected, there was a lot of talk that a ceasefire in Lebanon was close. There were some people who were concerned that the election of Trump would um, make it more difficult to reach the deal, but it hasn't turned out that way. Trump has given his blessing to the Amos Hochstein um, purview, to the framework that he's put together, and Israel has given its blessing too. So that's been forwarded to the Lebanese Speaker of Parliament, who is discussing it with Hezbollah. Um, we've already talked about what's in there in a previous episode. There's two main elements that are controversial. One, Israel has requested the ability to strike within Lebanon at will when they feel that the agreement is being violated. That's not been included in the agreement, but it appears the U.S. is willing to offer it as a stipulation in a separate memorandum. So that should solve that problem. Israel doesn't really need permission from Lebanon to strike inside Lebanon. That should be acceptable. Lebanon should be able to um, ignore that because it's impossible for a sovereign country to say, you can strike in my territory whenever you want, and Israel will have those guarantees. A bigger problem is there's a conflict dispute mechanism. The conflict dispute mechanism that the US and Israel envision is one that's headed by the United States. Israel would go to the United States and say, there's this problem with the way the agreement is being put into practice, and we need it fixed. The Lebanese want it to go back to the previous conflict resolution mechanism from UN Resolution 1701 that puts UNIFIL and the UN at the helm of that conflict resolution. That is a big issue and one that might be difficult to resolve. I wouldn't say it's insoluble, though. There's a lot of pressure on Hezbollah to reach an agreement. Israel is expanding its military operation from the first line of villages in Lebanon to the second line. It started bombing in Beirut again. And also, it appears that Iran wants an end to this because Iran doesn't seem to be very happy with the way its tit for tat is going with Israel and would rather lower the flames. Having said that, Iran is not going to pull the rug out from under Hezbollah and force them into a deal on terms that they find unacceptable. So I don't think that this is going to be over in the next few days, but there is some reason for optimism that there will be a ceasefire in the end. Another thing to pay attention to is what's going on right now in Gaza. Um, in Gaza, Israel is continuing to put into practice what really looks like the general's plan, but in a very limited way so far. But what some IDF officers have been saying is that the people who are now leaving from the north to the south will not be allowed back, and there's going to be a division of Gaza along the route that Israel has created in the middle of the Gaza Strip. And one of the reasons for that is the IDF is finding that Hamas is rebuilding itself everywhere, even in the places that it most recently uh, removed the terrorist infrastructure from, like Sajawiya, for example. And Jabalia has already been in three times, and the IDF is concerned that it'll have to go in four times, five times, because as we've talked about many times on this show, since Israel's not replacing it with any kind of governing infrastructure, Hamas just keeps moving back in. There definitely are signs that the population in Gaza is getting really sick of Hamas and having to keep evacuating and having to keep suffering. We saw that in a piece that Ohad Chemo made on Channel 12, interviewing people that were saying very fierce things um, against Hamas, but it's unclear how much consequence that will have politically, especially when Israel's not replacing Hamas. A final thing to pay attention to is the issue of the Haredi draft. I've long said that if anything is going to bring this government down before it's time, it's going to be that. And I haven't seen that that's been resolved. Yoav Gallant was fired, ostensibly. One of the main reasons he was fired, probably the main reason, was so that a law could pass um, exempting the Haredi men from serving in the military. But when Katz was put in, Israel Katz, the new defense minister, he immediately approved 7,000 draft notices that Gallant had prepared to send out to Haredi men, something that I think a lot of the Haredi leaders hoped or even expected that Katz wouldn't do. And it doesn't really look like the Likud has the numbers to pass that exemption. And a member of the UTJ, the United Torah Judaism, the main Ashkenazi Haredi party, said that he feels the Likud has declared war on the Haredim. So the government is in a lot of danger still. The war in Gaza is nowhere near being finished, and the war in Lebanon may be coming to an end. So there's a lot of moving parts, and we'll be paying much closer attention now. I'm back after the elections, I promise. Didn't have a lot of questions this time, although the last episode was pretty popular. Shia LeBouf asked, are there any ways in which the other branches of the Israeli state could defeat this autogolp? Could the AG declare Netanyahu unfit, as Bogi Ya'alon suggested last week? Or could the military refuse to follow Bibi's instructions, hopefully in a way that doesn't cause a civil war? Okay, so I think the last one about the military not obeying Bibi's instructions is certainly not going to happen. After all, Netanyahu just put in a defense minister who is, I don't know if Yes Man might be pushing it, but he's certainly much more in tune with what Netanyahu wants. If anyone is going to be gone, it'll be Herzi Halevi, the commander in chief of the military. And so the military will be getting streamlined orders, and no one's going to disobey orders. That's not going to happen. What you said about the AG declaring Netanyahu unfit, that's interesting because recently the government, I say recently, yesterday, the government put out a letter saying that if Netanyahu is declared unfit, they'll see that as a coup. And no one knows where that came from. Is that being considered? Is that happening? Why would they release a letter like that? It seems weird to release a letter like that unless something is in the works. And of course, as a background, we have the whole scandal with all the documents and all that, which is still being investigated. So who knows? There might be some developments with that. If that happens and we have a real constitutional crisis, my guess would be the government just wouldn't obey that. And then what happens? Uh, but it probably won't reach that point. I think the only way Netanyahu is going to be removed is through elections. It's not going to be through some sort of legal maneuver. We saw with Trump as well, the legal maneuver don't really work. Ultimately, it's a democracy. It needs to be determined at the ballot. Okay, so that's all for this episode. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon at Shael Media and listening to my History of the Land of Israel podcast. I just put out an episode on the Kingdom of Israel, the biblical Kingdom of Israel at its prime. And now I'm working on an episode about the fall of the Kingdom of Israel. So there's going to be a lot of fun action there. Okay, I will see you here again very soon.